First thing I want to talk about are these types of questions to see if you know your work. And you're probably saying, duh, Dr. Rich, I just spent the last 2 years in this thing. Of course I know my work. And I would say, you know what? You're probably right. You do. But in today's world, where so many people actually plagiarize or have other people do their work for them, they may not fully understand what's in the work that they're defending. And this we want to make sure does not happen. If you've done your own work, you'll be fine. But if you had somebody else who wrote your work for you, or perhaps did too much of the tutoring and you didn't do enough of the learning, you may have a problem. 99% of the time, this is not a concern. So I just wanted to bring it out so you're aware that if you don't know your own work, that you better know it. Even if you had some help. There's nothing wrong with having a tutor, nothing wrong with having a statistician who helped you, but you have to defend your work. I had a statistician when I did my dissertation. He helped me understand better how to collect the data, then how to analyze it, how to report it. But my statistician was not on the call during that oral defense. I had to understand it all, and I was taught everything I needed to know and was able to defend it with no problem. If you're in that situation, just make sure you truly understand what is in your work and why it is there the way it is. You can expect open-ended questions. Rarely will you get a binary question. A binary question is something that would be answered with a yes or a no, a right or a wrong, a good or a bad, a true or a false. We're going to ask questions of you that are going to reflect the opportunity for you to be able to give some sort of explanation, to share some information. Perhaps it's going to be about the length of a paragraph with 4 or 5 sentences. Maybe it's going to take you less than that, but we want to give you the opportunity to share your insights, to explain or to describe your answer in a way that's going to be rich and full of information, so your committee members truly know to what level of expertise and understanding you have on your topic. And with those open-ended questions, you can expect them to be delivered in what's known as a semi-structured format. If you had done qualitative research or you've done other research where you've done interviews, you're probably familiar with the open-ended semi-structured type questions in interview. In the semi-structured, we look to be able to first get the answer from the open-ended question, and then depending on what you answered, that will depend on the type of follow-up question or what that follow-up question would be. It's not necessarily scripted, because you may answer the question one way and one faculty member may want to ask something about it the way their interests are. Another faculty member may ask you another question on the same answer you gave, but in a different way. For example, it might be about the theoretical conceptual framework that you described. One faculty member may say, tell us about that from the perspective of transformational leadership. While the other faculty member says, that's great. Now, how would you look at it if you were looking at it through a strategic planning type of framework? Well, the answers would be a little bit different. They'd each be correct, but it's not about whether they're correct or wrong. It's just about how you think and how you process information. Remember, open-ended, semi-structured questions are designed to get a robust, rich discourse going so that your committee members can get involved and have a great learning experience with you. You can expect these questions to be probing. Many times you're going to get questions from faculty members that's going to say, tell me more. Or when you did that step, why did you do it that way? Why didn't you do it another way? It's going to be focused into thinking more about the topic and for you to decide what's the best way to answer that. And many times here, again, it's not about a right or wrong answer, because if somebody's going to ask you a question, they may just want to know what you thought about when you were doing what you did. Or if you're in a proposal oral defense, you maybe get questions about when you collect data, what do you think you're going to do in a certain step? You may answer that and they'll say, well, now tell me more. What if this happens as compared to the way you described it? What would you do then? So it's probing. It's just getting you to give more information than you gave perhaps in the initial response. Critical thinking questions. The types of questions you can expect in pretty much every aspect of your oral defense is going to relate to critical thinking. If you're not familiar with critical thinking well enough, learn a little bit more. And these are the types of questions you might expect in regards to critical thinking. Now that you have looked at your entire literature review, what does that mean? Now, what they're really asking is, what is your analysis based on the synthesis of all the literature that you read? They may not put it in those terms, but that's what they're asking. So what they're looking for is for you to give the synthesis of the entire literature review, and then give a little bit of analysis, and then perhaps even evaluate that analysis. What does that truly mean in the context of your study? Same as your data. If you get a question that says, now you've collected all the data and you have it, what does it all mean in a very simple sentence? Wow. All they're asking you to do again is take it all, synthesize it, analyze it, evaluate it, and give them that one sentence. Again, you may not hear these terms of synthesize, analyze, evaluate, but that's what they're asking. The more you know about critical thinking, the more prepared you're going to be to answer the questions in the way that they expect it and to bring great credit upon yourself in your work. Other types of questions you can expect are explanatory questions. Explain why you did what you did. Explain how you're going to collect your data. Explain how you're going to analyze your data. Explain how you processed your quantitative data with the t-test. Why did you do a t-test instead of a chi-square test? Because they want you to explain perhaps a procedure or process to see if you actually did and understand every step in the process that you did do or that you will be doing. Exploratory questions. These are other questions which are designed to make you think about what if. Think about exploratory questions in the sense of you being an explorer. You're going out somewhere and you went out to find out that the earth was not flat. And when you came back, somebody would ask you questions. What did you realize? When did you realize that the world was not flat? When you found out the world was not flat, what did you think based on everything else you knew? These are exploratory questions. If you happen to have done a case study with explanatory, exploratory type of designs, then you are probably more familiar with these ideas than others might be. The idea of these different types of questions are merely just to have you provide that logical path, or in the case of being exploratory, it's not so much about logical as how do you critically think in regards to being creative? How might you save the future based on what you know now? Or in this case, exploratory. Knowing everything you know now about your dissertation, what would you do differently if you had to do it all over again? Wow, that's a great exploratory question. It'd be like Christopher Columbus after he came back from the first time and realized the earth was round. After he came back, somebody said, well, hey, Chris, what are you going to do next? Great exploratory question. Who knows? He probably had the idea, right? He's going to go out and try it again. What if questions? What if you do not get the survey sample you hope for with your quantitative study? What if instead of getting 150 replies back, you only get 22? Well, you should be able to answer those kinds of questions. What if? What if? What if? What if? What if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? The what if questions, again, get you to think perhaps either linearly, in that linear fashion of a step-by-step process. What if step number 2 doesn't work for you? What are you going to do? Stop, revise your work, or just skip it and go on to step number 3? What if? What if in the middle of your dissertation you realize that your research design is flawed? Wow, what a great question. This happens sometimes. We want to know if you've been able to think things through. Have you looked at maybe perhaps some risk mitigation in the process, or just been forward thinking to try to see what's going to happen? Keep in mind, if you're doing an oral defense then what happens there, you're going to be explaining how you're going to collect the data and how you analyze it. This is a great place for both explanatory questions and what if questions. What if it doesn't work the way you planned it? What will you do then? And you know what? You're going to get a lot of questions that may not have an exact answer. And you'll say, well, whew, am I going to fail? No, very rarely is there going to be a right answer. If you're going to get an exploratory question and you have one answer, somebody else may have a different answer. That's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. If you're going to explain something, if you are logical in sequences of how you're going to do something, and you get a question that kind of says, well, what if this happens? Chances are, even if you're not doing what you should be doing in regards to your answer, then you're going to get some help. They're going to say, well, have you thought about this? Again, another probing question. Have you thought about this? And you say, oh, I didn't think about that. Maybe I should start thinking about that now. The idea is all these questions are just to get that rich academic discourse going so that you and your committee members can all be engaged in a great conversation, have that academic discourse, and all have an enjoyable time together. Now I'm going to give you some ideas on what you can expect questions about. In regards to Chapter 1, you can expect questions about the background of your study, the problem statement, the research method and design, the scope and assumptions, the framework and limitations and delimitations. Somebody may ask you, based on your problem statement, how did it come to be what it is? And they may just want you to give them a little bit of history. Or what's the specific problem and how does it really relate to your survey population? Wow, what a great question there. Explain how you chose your research method and design and not another one. There you go. You wrote the nature of the study section in Chapter 1. As long as you remember what's in there, you should be pretty good to go, right? Somebody's probably going to ask some questions about the scope and the delimitations of your study. How did you decide to scope your work to what it is or what it was? You may get questions on your framework. Somebody may ask you to explain what's the difference between a theoretical and conceptual framework, or what's the difference between the two different frameworks that you provided. Again, they just want to know that you have an understanding of your work. In Chapter 2, you can certainly expect questions in regards to the different sources that you apply. Where did you find all the literature? Did you go to any libraries? What sources online did you find? When you identified the gap in the literature, how did you know when you identified that gap? How do you know, in fact, it is a gap? Do you have any literature that suggests it's a gap by other people? See, these are open-ended questions. You may get questions, again, in regards to the framework on how you put together Chapter 2. Help me understand why you have designed Chapter 2 in the way that you have from one heading to the next. A great question. You're the one who decided how to write Chapter 2. Perhaps you wrote your Chapter 2 based on giving your dependent variable first, and then addressing the independent variables, and then their relationships, and then the gap in the literature. That's a pretty simple question and a pretty simple answer to that question. You might get questions on divergent perspectives. Oftentimes students write Chapter 2, and it's all about everybody who thinks the same way. And oftentimes we find that there's not enough divergent views. If you're going to write about transformational leadership, there's a lot of aligning literature. But there's also a lot of literature that diverts from it and says that transformational leadership is not the best thing in the world. So we'd expect to see some kind of information on that. And if not, you can certainly expect a question on it. And overall struggles to complete. Somebody may ask you a question, how hard was it for you to complete Chapter 2? Or what was the hardest thing or the biggest challenge you had in writing Chapter 2? Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It is what it is for you. I could ask that same question to 5 different doctorate students and I might get 5 different answers. And you know what? That's okay. In regards to Chapter 3, you can expect questions on the research alignment. Help me understand how your hypotheses are aligned to your research questions to your research design. Well, of course, you know that because you had a correlation design. You had 3 independent variables, and 3 independent variables means you had to have 3 research questions, and for each research question, you had to have a hypothesis and a null hypothesis that align. Voila, you can answer those kinds of questions. How did you, or how will you, protect for confidentiality of people involved in your study? This should be pretty simple at the oral defense at either your proposal or your dissertation. How are you going to protect the survey population? If you interviewed 15 people, how are we going to be assured that those names are never going to appear in your work? We want to know where you're going to keep that information when it's done. Is it going to be kept in your safe or in the trunk of your car for 5 years? Data collection method, data analysis approach. Chapter 3, in many cases, particularly to researchers, the most important parts are how are you going to collect the data, or how did you collect the data, and how did you analyze it? So you can certainly expect questions in regards to those. In Chapter 4, you won't get as many questions on the process unless people want to know about your pilot test. Tell us how you administered your pilot test. What did you find in your pilot test? Did it change your quantitative questions at all after you did the pilot test? Or was it a waste of time? Then you might get questions on quantitative data testing, like how did you decide to reject or fail to reject the null? You will get questions in regards to the testing in the quantitative dissertations. In the qualitative dissertations, you can expect questions related to how did you identify the themes? How did you decide to put the themes in order in the way you addressed them? Was it because of how many people had something to say with that theme? Was it alphabetic? Was it because some themes were never seen in literature before and those you decided needed to be addressed first? Again, you've written Chapter 4. You will have had the opportunity to know everything that's in that chapter and therefore be able to answer every question that I just posed in these few minutes. Chapter 5 questions. Questions that relate to implications of the data. You may have made a recommendation and somebody may say, you made a strong recommendation on weak data. How is it that that implication is what it is? Oftentimes, it's just going to, again, be these explanatory or exploratory questions, or the what-if questions, just to make you think about what you have and open the opportunities for a dialogue. And perhaps even after the oral defense is done, where you go back into your work and make a few adjustments and edits to make your work even better. You can certainly expect questions in regards to justification of the recommendations. This is an area I see all too often. I will never approve a dissertation as a committee member, as a chair, or even reviewing as a dissertation reviewer for a university if every recommendation and implication is not grounded in the data in Chapter 4. If you make a recommendation, you have to have it justified, and it's not just enough to say that more research needs to be done on X, Y, and Z, or because of your personal experiences. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for recommendations based on the data that was found. And did it support the hypotheses or not, or did it end up actually producing a theme? The value of data to others, you might get a question, not your dissertation's done. Do you think your data will be of any value to somebody else to derive additional information from? You can certainly expect questions on tiebacks. How is your dissertation, now that's completed, where in Chapter 5 do I see the tieback to how your data produced information to answer the research questions that fills the gap in the literature in regards to the problem that you wrote about in Chapter 1. You might get questions on the limitations of the findings. This is different than the limitations in Chapter 1. Chapter 1, you wrote about the limitations of the study. Here, now, what's the limitations of the findings? Can it be used by a broader audience? Is the generalizability there? Is it truthful? We're looking to see how valuable the study can be in regards to its significance and being substantial to somebody other than you getting your academic assignment completed so you can graduate. And it's that closing of the loop back to Chapter 1, as I mentioned. How do you tie everything together? I'll give you a couple ideas on sample questions you can expect. Why did you run a chi-square or a t-test? This is explanatory. You have to explain it. You've already made the choice. Just explain why. Perhaps you know the calculations. Perhaps you memorized the reason for a chi-square test or a t-test. That's all you have to do is answer that question. By the time you get to an oral defense, either at the proposal or dissertation, you've already made your choices. You've already substantiated it. Now you just have to explain why. What did your research provide that you did not expect to find? I could ask that same question based on the same research with 5 people, and it might get 5 different answers. All we want to know from you in your creative thinking, in your perspective of your own work, what did you find that you didn't expect? Every student has always found something they didn't expect. The majority of us, we get an idea long before we collect the data on what we anticipate will come to us. Because after all, you've read the literature, you've made an educated guess. But in every instance, you're going to learn something that you didn't expect. And that's oftentimes the value of research. And that's what keeps people so interested in research, because usually, even if we research the same topic as others, we're bound to find something that somebody else did not find because of our approach or perhaps of our own perspectives that we put into our work. Why? The research method and design as compared to others. Again, I've addressed this before. Why did you decide to choose and use a quantitative correlation study instead of a quantitative causality study? Why do a quantitative as compared to a qualitative? Now, going back to your own work, in Chapter 1 and Chapter 3, you've already justified this. All you got to do is help us understand the choices you made and why. It's not about right or wrong. We just want to know why you decided that path. I may look at the same gap in the literature and say, well, the best way to fill that gap is with a different research method. And that's okay too, because that's the value of research. You could do your qualitative research, I can do my quantitative research, and we could both produce information that could be used by others to lessen their problem. If you had to do this research all over again, what would you do differently based on what you know now that you did not know before? So the question here is, this is about being that creative aspect. It's just truly, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do different? Some people would say I would have picked a different topic. Some people might say, I wish I would have picked a different chair. Or, you know what? If I had to do it all over again, I would have done a mixed method study, because by doing a qualitative case study, it wasn't quite enough. I needed to do more. And maybe you'll say, well, you know, when I get done with my dissertation, get published, I'm going to do that other part of the study. Certainly you don't have to, but when you're asked these kinds of questions, we just want to see, you know, if you're self-reflected on this, and if your self-reflection, and through that you did some sort of assessment, is there a correction, or is there something you do differently based on what you learned in the process? We hope that you're going to learn many things in the dissertation process, but oftentimes we're not going to ask you about everything. But if you had to do it all over again, what's one thing you would do different? What value does your proposal or your dissertation hold for others? Now, you wrote the significance of the study section in Chapter 1. I think if you go back and read that, you would be able to answer this question, right? Because you already wrote about it. Just like every other question I've asked so far, you've already written about it on how it happened or how it's going to happen. So again, there's nothing new in the oral defense. So one, don't get so stressed out about doing oral defense. If you know what's in your work, you'll be fine. You follow the steps in this lesson strategy, you'll be so prepared for it, you'll be at ease and ready to have a great time with your committee members. And how welcome will that be for everybody? What do you think about the reviewer's comments about your work? Oftentimes, whether it be at the proposal and more often at the dissertation phase, you've already submitted your work to your university. They've reviewed it. They've given you some feedback. Perhaps it was many things need to be changed or revised. Perhaps it's a couple things. What we want to know is, were you able to reflect on feedback that somebody gave you without being totally upset and blaming somebody else for problems that were not in your work or you didn't know about? We want to make sure you're prepared to be that doctoral credentialed person and able to see that sometimes that we can all do better at who we are and the things that we do. And if we get a chance to do better the next time, will we know what to do? And this question here is nothing more than gaining a sense for your balance, to find out how well you can accept critiques of your own work and keep moving forward. The good thing is, by the time you got to this level in your academic career, you've been getting feedback on papers and proposals and drafts of dissertations for weeks and months and years. Shouldn't be anything new. Okay, now we get to the fun stuff. One of Dr. Rich's oral defense frustrations is students who provide an answer, but not the correct one. You know, it's not uncommon that somebody asks you a question and you don't understand the question and you go off on a tangent. We want to make sure you understand the question. So the first thing I always tell students all the time is, if you don't understand the question ask for it to be repeated. Now, most students are going to be a little nervous when they get to their oral defense because, after all, they're excited to be at this time in their academic career. You're going to be a little excited. But if you don't understand a question, just ask for clarification. The worst thing you could do is just ramble on. And if you are rambling on the wrong way, chances are your faculty member is going to say, whoa, 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 I don't think you really understood the question. Some faculty will just let you go on and on and on and on. And then when they're done, they'll say, well, you didn't answer my question. I asked about this. Then that's going to be a little awkward. Not for the faculty members, but for you. So we want to make sure when you're doing your oral defense that you answer the question the correct way. If in doubt, ask about. What did they ask you, to be sure? Or get into the answer with a few sentences. If you're uncertain, then just say, is this what you mean? They'll say, yeah. They'll say, no, I was really looking more for this kind of response. And then they'll direct you, and then you'll be fine. Dr. Rich's quote for this lesson is, be ready for questions to make you think and learn even more. That's the true value of a great oral defense, is that you're going to get questions that make you think, not only about your work, but about yourself and how you did your work and about what you learned in the process. And to get you to learn even more about the content and about yourself. And hopefully your committee members are going to learn something new about the content, because after all, you are the subject matter expert. But if you can create a good discussion with your committee members, what a fantastic time that's going to be. I've been on some great oral defenses where the midst of it, after the presentation by the student for 30, 45 minutes, we were just on a roll having a good old time. We would have liked to have gone together and had coffee afterwards if we could have. So these are the outcomes of being prepared for your oral defense, and it's just having a great time. I'm Dr. Rich Schuttler. You can expect questions that make you think.